The Exoneration of Peter Sullivan, the 1986 murder of Diane Sindall. Welcome to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast, where we explore the most compelling unsolved mysteries and cases of justice gone wrong from across Canada and beyond. Today we're diving into a case that stretched across nearly 4 decades. A story of a brutal murder, a wrongful conviction, and a long overdue exoneration that has left an indelible mark on the justice system. This is the story of Diane Sindall's murder in 1986 and Peter Sullivan's relentless fight for justice. Grab a coffee, settle in, and let's unravel this haunting tale together. Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. It's a gripping true crime podcast uncovering unsolved murders, disappearances, and forgotten crimes from Ontario and beyond. Told with deep research, compelling storytelling, and a voice for the victims. Join us today, where every clue could lead to answers, and every case deserves a second look. Background: Diane Sindall and the fateful night. Our story begins in the summer of 1986 in Birkenhead, a town in Merseyside, UK, just across the River Mersey from Liverpool. Diane Sindall was a 21-year-old woman with a warm smile and a promising future. She worked as a florist by day, arranging bouquets for weddings and celebrations, and as a part-time barmaid by night, pouring pints and chatting with regulars. Diane was engaged to be married, her life brimming with hope and plans for the years ahead. On the evening of August 1st, 1986, Diane was behind the bar at the Wellington Public House in Bebington, a small community not far from Birkenhead. It was a typical Friday night shift, busy, lively, the hum of conversation filling the air. She clocked out at 11:45 p.m., said goodnight to her colleagues, and climbed into her blue Fiat van to head home. But just a short distance into her drive along Borough Road, the van sputtered to a stop. She'd run out of petrol, a minor inconvenience that would tragically alter the course of her life. With no fuel to get home, Diane made the decision to walk the rest of the way. It was a warm summer night, the streets quiet but not deserted. Between midnight and 12:20 a.m. on August 2nd, 1986, several witnesses saw her making her way along Borough Road, her figure illuminated by the occasional street lamp. One witness, a taxi driver, later reported seeing a man and woman arguing near that stretch of road around 12:10 a.m., a sighting that would later be featured in the UK television program Crime Watch. That brief glimpse may have been one of the last moments Diane was seen alive. The murder and discovery. Diane never made it home that night. 12 hours later, at around noon on August 2nd, a dog walker stumbled upon a horrific scene in an alley just off Borough Road. There, hidden among the shadows, was Diane Sindall's body. She'd been brutally attacked, her life extinguished in a violent and frenzied assault. The autopsy revealed the extent of her injuries: multiple blows to the head, bite marks on her body, and lacerations across her skin. The official cause of death was a cerebral hemorrhage, the result of the relentless trauma inflicted upon her. Evidence at the scene pointed to a sexual assault, adding another layer of horror to an already devastating crime. The next day, August 3rd, Diane's clothes, or what remained of them, were found partially burned on Bidston Hill, a wooded area a few miles from the murder site. Witnesses from the night of the attack came forward, recalling a man seen running from the direction of the alley shortly after midnight. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to emerge. They painted a grim and chaotic picture. The brutality of Diane's murder sent shockwaves through Birkenhead and the wider Merseyside community. It's the kind of crime that lingers in the collective memory, a stark reminder of vulnerability in a place where people felt safe. the Merseyside police launched what would become the largest investigation in their history at that time, interviewing approximately 3,000 individuals, friends, neighbors, pub patrons, anyone who might hold a clue. Yet despite their exhaustive efforts, weeks passed with no arrest, no suspect, and no answers for Diane's grieving family. Up next, the investigation and Peter Sullivan's arrest. The investigation and Peter Sullivan's arrest. By late summer, the pressure to solve Diane's murder was mounting. The community demanded justice, and the police were desperate for a breakthrough. That break came on September 23, 1986, when 29-year-old Peter Sullivan was arrested in connection with the crime. Peter Sullivan was an unassuming figure in Birkenhead, a man often described as a quiet loner. He lived a solitary life, keeping to himself, and had no prior criminal record of note. But what drew the police's attention to him remains murky. What we do know is that the case against him hinged on two key pieces of evidence: a confession and forensic bite mark analysis. Let's start with the confession. After his arrest, Sullivan was interrogated by police, and during those sessions, he reportedly admitted to killing Diane Sindall. But here's where things get troubling. Sullivan later retracted that confession, claiming he'd been interviewed without a solicitor or an appropriate adult present, someone to support him during questioning. Why does that matter? Because Peter Sullivan had limited intellectual functioning, a condition that made him particularly vulnerable to coercion or misunderstanding under pressure. Without proper safeguards, the reliability of his confession was immediately called into question. The second pillar of the prosecution's case was the bite mark evidence. Forensics odontologists, experts in dental impressions, testify the bite marks found in Diane's body match Sullivan's teeth. At the time, bite mark analysis was considered cutting-edge science, a tool to link suspects to crimes with supposed precision. Sullivan's dental impressions were compared to the marks. The experts declared a match. It was compelling, dramatic evidence, perfect for a courtroom. But as we'll see later, this science wasn't as solid as it seemed. The trial and conviction. In 1987, Peter Sullivan stood trial at Liverpool Crown Court, charged with the murder of Diane Sindall. The prosecution painted a picture of a disturbed loner who had preyed on a vulnerable young woman walking home alone. They leaned heavily on the retracted confession and the bite mark evidence, presenting them as irrefutable proof of his guilt. The defense argued that the confession was unreliable and the forensic evidence circumstantial, but the jury was swayed by the prosecution's narrative. After deliberation, Sullivan was found guilty. The judge sentenced him to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 16 years, a sentence that would stretch far beyond that minimum due to the nature of the crime and the lack of parole success. At just 29 years old, Peter Sullivan was locked away, his life confined to the gray walls of a prison cell. But even as the gavel fell, whispers of doubt lingered. The case against him was built on shaky ground. For those who knew him, the idea that this quiet, unassuming man was a brutal killer didn't quite add up. Decades of doubt and the fight for freedom. Peter Sullivan's conviction didn't mark the end of the story. It was just the beginning of a decades-long battle to clear his name. From behind bars, Sullivan maintained his innocence, and over the years he and his supporters made repeated attempts to overturn the verdict. His first major effort came in 2008, when he applied to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, or CCRC, a UK body tasked with investigating potential miscarriages of justice. Sullivan's legal team argued that the original evidence was flawed, but the technology at the time limited their options. DNA analysis wasn't advanced enough to extract a usable profile from the crime scene evidence, and the CCRC rejected the application. A subsequent appeal to the courts in 2019 met the same fate. Another door closed. Another hope dashed. But the tides began to turn in 2021. Advancements in forensic science have revolutionized DNA testing, allowing experts to revisit old evidence with new precision. Semen samples collected from Diane's body, preserved for decades, were re-examined using these cutting-edge techniques. What they found would change everything. Up next, the exoneration, new DNA evidence. The exoneration, new DNA evidence. Fast forward to May 2025. On a Tuesday morning, the Court of Appeal in London convened to hear Peter Sullivan's case one more time. The panel, Lord Justice Holroyd, Mr. Justice Gose, Mr. Justice Bryan, listened as Sullivan's legal team presented the results of the new DNA analysis. The semen samples from Diane's abdomen, originally collected in 1986, yielded a clear DNA profile. That profile did not match Peter Sullivan. Instead, it pointed to an unknown male 1, an individual whose genetic signature was 1 billion times more likely to be the source of the semen than Sullivan's. To ensure the evidence held up, investigators ruled out contamination and confirmed that the DNA didn't match Diane's fiancé, her family, or anyone else with a legitimate reason to be present. The conclusion was unmistakable. The semen belonged to Diane's killer, and there was no evidence of multiple attackers or consensual activity prior to her death. This was a bombshell. The bite mark evidence, once a cornerstone of Sullivan's conviction, had already been discredited by modern forensic science. Studies in the years since 1987 showed it to be unreliable, more art than science. The confession, extracted under questionable circumstances, crumbled under scrutiny. And now, with DNA pointing to someone else entirely, the case against Sullivan collapsed. The Court of Appeal didn't hesitate. They quashed his conviction, declaring it unsafe. After 38 years, 7 months, 21 days in custody, including 1 year on remand, Peter Sullivan was a free man. At 68 years old, he walked out of HMP Wakefield, having spent more than half his life behind bars for a crime he didn't commit. The aftermath, release and reactions. The moment of Sullivan's release was bittersweet. His lawyer, Sarah Myatt, stood by his side, praising his resilience and the tireless work of those who fought for his freedom. His sister, Kim Smith, was overcome with emotion. "We've done it," she said, tears in her voice, before adding, "We lost Peter for 39 years. Those words capture the profound toll of this wrongful conviction. Not just on Sullivan, but on his family, who watch hopelessly as decades slip away. The Crown Prosecution Service, which once argued so fiercely for his guilt, conceded the obvious. The new DNA evidence undermined the original case beyond repair. They didn't oppose the appeal, and no retrial was sought. For Peter Sullivan, it was vindication at last, but it came at an unimaginable cost. The reopened investigation. With Sullivan exonerated, attention turned back to the question that started it all. Who killed Diane Sindall? Merseyside police, in collaboration with the National Crime Agency, reopened the investigation with renewed vigor. Since 2023, 2 years before Sullivan's release, when the DNA evidence first emerged, they screened over 260 men, comparing their DNA to the profile of unknown male 1. So far, no matches have turned up in the National DNA database, leaving the killer's identity elusive. Detective Chief Superintendent Karen Jondrell, leading the effort, has made public appeals for information. "We are committed to finding Diane's killer," she said in a recent statement. "Even the smallest detail could be the key to solving this case." The police urge anyone who lived in and around Birkenhead in 1986, or who knows someone who did, to come forward with anything they might remember from that fateful night. The Birkenhead community, still scarred by Diane's murder, has rallied behind the renewed investigation. Locals speak of a lingering unease. A sense of justice has been delayed too long. Charity workers like Joe Wood from RASA Merseyside, a support organization for assault survivors, have noted that suspicion about Sullivan's guilt was never universal. "There were always people thought the wrong man was locked up," Wood said. "Some even claimed to know the real killer. But without evidence, those whispers remain just that, whispers, until the DNA breakthrough gave them new weight." Up next, reflection, lessons from the case. Reflection, lessons from the case. The exoneration of Peter Sullivan is more than just a single victory. It's a stark reminder of the justice system's fallibility. This case shines a spotlight on the dangers of relying on discredited science, like bite mark evidence, and the risks of coercive interrogations, especially for vulnerable individuals like Sullivan. It also underscores the power of forensic advancements, how a single DNA profile can rewrite history and right a decades-old wrong. But it's not just about the past. Sullivan's story highlights the need for ongoing vigilance, continuous review of old convictions, especially those built on shaky foundations. How many others are out there, serving time for crimes they didn't commit, waiting for science or persistence to set them free? As for Diane Sindall, her murder remains unsolved. The DNA evidence has given investigators a lead, but the trail is cold, the killer still at large. Her family, who have endured nearly 40 years of grief, deserve answers. The community deserves closure. Diane herself deserves justice. Justice that, for now, remains out of reach. That's where we leave this episode of Ontario Cold Cases. The story of Diane Sindall and Peter Sullivan is a haunting blend of tragedy, perseverance, and a slow grind of truth. We'll keep an eye on this case and update you if there are any breakthroughs in the hunt for Diane's killer. Thank you for joining me today. If you have any information about the murder of Diane Sindall, however small it might seem, please contact Merseyside Police or visit their website. You can also reach out to us in Ontario Cold Cases with your thoughts, questions, or suggestions for future episodes. Until next time, stay curious, stay safe, keep seeking the truth. This has been Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. I'll see you soon, because every case deserves answers, and every victim deserves justice. Subscribe now to Ontario Cold Cases, Canada's True Crime Podcast. Episodes available wherever you get your podcasts.